Marcus Delaney had never been the kind of guy to pick fights. He worked remotely in cybersecurity, spent his evenings restoring vintage radios, and moved to the outskirts of Pine Hollow precisely because it seemed peaceful. The old he bought sat at the very end of the street, with a long, cracked driveway and a detached garage just begging to be turned into a workshop. Best of all, the property listing had clearly stated, no HOA. That little detail had sealed the deal, but Marcus didn't know that Pine Hollow had an unofficial queen. She introduced herself before the moving truck even pulled away. "I'm Karen Hollister," she said, arms folded, lips tight. "I'm head of the Pine Hollow HOA." Marcus had barely set down his box of tools. "Nice to meet you," he said, offering a smile. Karen didn't return it. Instead, she glanced at his truck, then at the weeds growing around his mailbox. "You know," she said, "we have appearance standards around here. I'd hate for the neighbors to think the property values are going downhill." Marcus blinked. "I thought my place wasn't part of the Karen smiled then, but it wasn't friendly. "Technically, no. But this is a community. We all share the same standards." That was the first red flag. The second came a few days later when Marcus found a piece of paper taped to his door, an official notice stating that his garage paint color was in violation of community expectations. The HOA letterhead looked off, almost like it had been made on a home printer. He ignored it. Then came the parade of complaints. Marcus planted native drought-resistant shrubs along the front walk. The next day, Karen was out front with a measuring tape, taking photos. He replaced the rotting wooden fence behind the garage. A week later, she called the city, claiming he was disturbing habitat space. A code enforcement officer showed up, glanced around, apologized, and left. Marcus started keeping a file of every interaction. It wasn't just passive aggression anymore. Karen clearly believed she had authority over him even though his property sat just outside the HOA's official boundary. Still, Marcus didn't engage. He wasn't looking for war, but that didn't mean he was blind. What really set things off was the driveway. The long strip of concrete beside his house was legally his, but ran parallel to a community walking path. One weekend, Marcus decided to pour fresh gravel along the edges, clean the concrete, and install a small motion light. Nothing dramatic, just maintenance. Karen saw it and lost her mind. "You can't do that," she shouted from her porch. "That area borders common used land." Marcus stayed calm. "Check the county plat map. This is all mine." Karen didn't answer. She just stared at him, phone in hand, fingers flying over the screen like she was writing a report. The next morning, he walked out to find someone had spray-chalked a line down the middle of his driveway. On his side, private on the other, HOA limit in huge letters. That was when it hit him. Karen wasn't just petty. She was delusional, and she was escalating. Still, Marcus kept quiet. No calls, no confrontation. Just a calm look, a slow shake of his head, and a decision forming quietly in his mind. Because while Karen thought she was laying down boundaries, she had no idea the one boundary she just crossed was the last one Marcus would let her get away with. 3 days passed without a word. Marcus went about his routine, fixing the leaky garage roof and organizing his tools. But every so often he'd glance out the window to see Karen standing across the street, phone in hand, pretending to water a bush that didn't need watering. She watched like a hawk, waiting for the smallest misstep. But Marcus gave her nothing, until the morning he left to buy lumber. It was supposed to be a quick trip, just a half-hour run to the hardware store for some planks and fasteners. When he pulled back into the street, what he saw made his foot freeze on the brake. A silver chain-link fence now stretched across his driveway with thick steel posts sunk directly into the concrete. A bright red padlock held the gate closed. There was a sign zip-tied to the center. HOA property, no unauthorized access. He stared for a moment, dumbfounded. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't chalk or paint or some passive-aggressive sign. This was an engineered, installed, structure sunk in, bolted down, and blocking his access completely. He couldn't park. He couldn't reach his garage. He couldn't even get his wheelbarrow out without going through someone else's yard. He stepped out of his truck, heart thudding not from anger, not yet, but disbelief. Karen was already waiting for him, standing on her porch like she'd rehearsed the moment. Her arms were folded. Her sunglasses sat perched on her nose like a crown. "I warned you," she said. "You've been illegally altering community-adjacent land. This is an enforcement measure." Marcus blinked. "That's my driveway." She smiled. "Actually, it's within the HOA's shared buffer zone. I reviewed the bylaws. This is perfectly within our rights. Your HOA doesn't cover this house." "That's up for debate," she said, lifting her chin. "The developer didn't clearly define the annex boundaries. I've spoken with the board, and they agree." He stared at her, trying to comprehend the layers of insanity. "You locked me out of my own property. I secured a community asset," she said coldly. "You can appeal it at the next board meeting next month." Marcus felt a flicker in his jaw. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was something more dangerous. Resolve. He turned and walked back to his truck. Karen watched him go, as if expecting him to scream or argue or shout something over his shoulder. But Marcus said nothing. Inside his house, He didn't punch a wall or call a lawyer. He sat down at his computer, pulled up the county GIS map system, and began digging. Because he knew one thing for certain. No HOA in the world had the right to install a fence on private land. And if Karen had done it without permits, if she had misrepresented her authority to contractors or worse, fabricated documents, then she hadn't just overstepped, she had broken the law. And Marcus wasn't going to fight her in a boardroom full of people who owed her favors. He was going to bury her with facts under the weight of her own arrogance. But first, he had to find out exactly how deep her mistake ran. Because if Karen thought a padlock and fence would be enough to stop him, she had just built the wrong wall. The next morning, Marcus stood by the fence with a cup of coffee in hand, staring at it like it had personally insulted him. The metal was shiny and new, bolted into the concrete like it had been planned for weeks. Not only was it in the middle of his driveway, but it wrapped slightly along the side of his garage, effectively boxing in his access. His phone buzzed. It was a neighbor named Lynn from 2 doors down. Just saw what Karen did. That can't be legal, right? Marcus replied, with a short text, working on it. He called the local non-emergency police line and requested an officer for a property access dispute. 40 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. A tired-looking officer stepped out and squinted at the fence, then at Marcus, then back at the gate. So, this was put up recently. The officer asked, "This weekend? I came back from the store and found myself locked out of my own garage, and this is your driveway." "Yes, I have the deed, plat maps, and property lines printed. Out inside, it's my land." The officer scratched his head. "Well, this is complicated. If she says it's HOA controlled," Marcus cut in, handing him the papers, "but it's not. The HOA boundary ends 70 feet east. This property was built before the HOA was formed. I'm not part of it. Never have been." The officer frowned and flipped through the documents, visibly uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not saying I don't believe you," he said, "but unless there's a clear criminal violation, vandalism, theft, assault, this is a civil issue. You'd have to take it to small claims, or get a court order." Marcus stared at the man here, saying someone can trespass on my land. Lock me out of it, and you can't do anything. I'm saying we can't enforce property lines. That's for civil court. The officer handed the documents back, gave him a sympathetic shrug, and returned to his car. From across the street, Karen stood with her arms crossed, wearing that same smug smile that now seemed etched into her face like a permanent mask. Raised a glass of iced tea toward Marcus like it was a toast. He went back inside, fury now boiling beneath the surface. She had planned this every step. She knew the police wouldn't intervene. She counted on it. She knew most people wouldn't have the time or money to fight her in court. What she didn't know was that Marcus wasn't most people. He sat down at his desk and opened 3 tabs on his laptop: county assessor, land records, and zoning compliance. If this was going to be a battle of bureaucracy, he would win at 1 inch of paperwork at a time. By nightfall, he had everything he needed. Official plat maps from the city showing his lot's dimensions, recorded legal descriptions, and aerial photos that proved the fence was planted directly in the middle of his property. But he didn't stop there. He checked contractor permits and found no listing for any fence installation in his zip code. No approvals, no inspections. Whoever Karen hired did the job quietly and illegally. Then came the bombshell. Buried in an archived city planning document, Marcus found the original HOA boundary lines. Not only was his property excluded, but a formal exemption had been recorded. Years ago, when the developer tried and failed to annex his lot into the HOA, Karen had no authority, not even a little, and now she had built a physical structure on private property, under false pretenses. It was more than trespassing. It was fraud, and Marcus had just found her weakest point. By sunrise the next day, Marcus wasn't just ready, he was armed. He drove 2 hours through winding county roads to the regional land records office. He could have downloaded most of the files from home, but he wanted originals. Stamps, seals, documents that couldn't be questioned or dismissed as edited by some HOA busybody. If this came down to a fight, he wouldn't give Karen a single thread to pull on. The clerk behind the counter raised an eyebrow when he saw the list of parcels Marcus asked to view. "You building something big?" Marcus smiled. "I'm preparing to take something down." Within 40 minutes, he had a folder thick with copies, certified plats, surveyor signatures, developer notes, and the original exclusion document for his property filed 21 years ago. The HOA had never owned a single inch of his land. Not then, not now. But what made him stop cold was a faded survey from the early 2000s. Filed after the HOA had formed, it showed not just the legal lot lines but a highlighted note in the margin from a city inspector. Private driveway to remain sole property of Lot 12, no easement granted or implied. That was it. That was the line Karen had crossed. She hadn't just guessed wrong, she had plowed straight over decades of official documentation and planted her flag like it belonged to her. And now Marcus had the receipts. He drove home slower than usual, mind calm, calculating. He no longer needed to guess what Karen's game was. She wasn't trying to control him, she was trying to claim him. His home, his land, his compliance. To her, A property outside the HOA was an infection, and she was the cure. By the time he got home, her car was parked outside again. She stood by the fence, clipboard in hand, snapping more photos. This time, of his motion light and the new gravel edging. Trying to build a case, Marcus thought. Something to weaponize if she got dragged into court. Smile, he said as he walked past her. Karen paused. You'll want to take that light down before the board sees it. I'm not in your HOA, that's what you think. Marcus stopped and turned, still smiling. You know what's funny? You keep threatening me with bylaws that don't apply. I've got maps, deeds, and a signed exclusion letter from your own HOA's original charter. You've got, what? A fake violation notice and a clipboard. Karen's face twitched, just slightly. I suggest you unlock that gate by Friday, Marcus added, his tone now like steel beneath the calm, because Saturday morning, it's coming down legally, professionally. And with documentation, you won't be able to dispute. She didn't respond, but her grip on the clipboard tightened. Marcus walked back to his porch without another word. From that point on, he didn't look over at her house, didn't answer her passive-aggressive notes, didn't engage at all. Instead, he booked a licensed demolition contractor. He printed off legal release forms and made sure the fence crew had copies of the county records. He even contacted a lawyer not to sue, yet but to document every step in case Karen tried to spin it later. It wasn't about revenge, it was about the line. She thought she could redraw it whenever she wanted. He was about to teach her that some boundaries weren't meant to be crossed, and when they were, the consequences didn't just fall, they crashed down in pieces of steel and concrete. Friday came fast, but not quietly. Karen's energy shifted as the week wore on. At first, she pretended nothing was wrong, leaving clipped violation notices on Marcus's mailbox, casually pacing the sidewalk with her phone like she was gathering more ammunition. But by Thursday evening, her facade began to crack. Marcus noticed the increased traffic, UVS pulling up to her house, board members from the HOA arriving in stiff polos, speaking in hushed voices. One of them even came to Marcus's porch unannounced. We're just trying to maintain harmony in the neighborhood, the man had said. Marcus didn't even invite him in. Then talked to the woman who installed a fence on private property. The man shifted awkwardly. There's some disagreement over that? No, Marcus replied, holding up the stamped survey document. There really isn't. He shut the door before the man could spin it further. Friday morning, Karen took her power trip public. By 9 a.m., Marcus spotted her in front of the fence with a group of neighborhood residents. They stood around it like it was some kind of monument. Karen pointed at the gravel, the garage, the overhead motion light, and Marcus could practically hear her speech through the window. She was playing the victim, claiming this was all a misunderstanding, that her HOA had been protecting common interests, that Marcus was the one escalating things. He took a photo of the gathering from his window and added it to the file he kept on his desktop labeled HOA_Karen_evidence. By noon, a bright orange flyer appeared in his mailbox. Community emergency. Meeting, 6 p.m., HOA Center, attendance requested. He chuckled. It reeked of desperation. She was scrambling to rally back up, hoping she could outvote reality. But Marcus had already called the sheriff's department earlier that day, not for enforcement, but to notify. He explained the situation, the documentation, the contractor's arrival scheduled for Saturday morning. He wanted the demolition legal, clean, and uncontested. The deputy he spoke to said one thing that stuck with him. If everything you say checks out, and she doesn't take it down herself, you're well within your rights to remove it. Still, Marcus wasn't celebrating yet. He knew Karen wouldn't back down. She had built her authority on intimidation and half-truths, and a person like that doesn't fold quietly. They doubled down. Sure enough, by 5:30 that evening, Marcus caught her standing near the fence again, this time, hammering a wooden stake into the gravel with a new sign stapled to it. Private HOA property trespassers will be reported. He stared at it through his window, feeling something sharp inside him settle. She hadn't listened. She hadn't budged. She really thought the deadline was a bluff. But Marcus hadn't been bluffing. That night, he lined up the paperwork on the kitchen table: demolition permit, contractor license, property deed, 3 maps, and 6 photos of the illegally installed fence. He packed it all into a folder and set it next to the coffee pot. Tomorrow, they would tear it all down, not in rage, not in secrecy, but in full daylight with the law at his side. And when Karen came storming out to stop them, as he knew she would, she'd be greeted not by Marcus's temper, but by cold, undeniable truth. This wasn't about fences anymore. This was about the moment her fantasy of power met the brick wall of reality. Saturday morning dawned clean and sharp. The sky was cloudless, the air crisp, and the street unusually quiet, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Marcus stood at the edge of his driveway with a clipboard in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. The demolition truck pulled in right on time. It wasn't flashy, just a 2-man crew with a work trailer, a jackhammer, a concrete saw, and a confident gait. You the guy with the HOA problem? The foreman asked, nodding toward the fence. That's the one, Marcus replied, handing over the packet of paperwork. Everything's in here. Property lines, permits, legal boundaries. You're not crossing a single inch of HOA land. This is all mine. The foreman flipped through the folder, gave a slow nod, then grinned. Let's make some noise. The first crack of the concrete drill echoed like thunder. Karen came flying out of her house faster than Marcus expected. She didn't have time to put on her usual showy sunglasses, or even a coat. She crossed the street in bedroom slippers and a silk robe. Her expression twisted into outrage. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked. The foreman didn't even look up. He had ear protection on, and a job to do. Marcus stepped in before she got too close. "I warned you, Karen. I gave you until Friday. It's Saturday. This is HOA property." She screamed. "This is illegal. You'll be arrested." Marcus calmly held up the signed documents. "This is my property. I have the legal plat maps, the city records. Even your HOA charter says I'm not part of it. You're altering common land." She spat. "No," Marcus said, voice steady. "You built on private land, without a permit, without consent. And now, it's coming down." Behind him, the sound of steel posts being pulled from concrete punctuated every word like a drumbeat. A few neighbors stepped out onto their porches, curious, cautious, phones in hand. Some already recording. Karen whirled around. "Call the HOA board. Somebody call the police." "I already did," Marcus said. "Sheriff's office was notified yesterday. You'll want to speak to them about the legal implications of your little construction project." Karen's voice cracked. "You're not allowed to do this. This is vandalism." "No," said a new voice. A sheriff's deputy stepped out of a black SUV that had pulled up without sirens just moments earlier. He walked up with a calm stride and approached Karen. "I reviewed the paperwork with Mr. Wells yesterday. The fence is on his private land." He gave proper notice. "This isn't vandalism. It's a property owner removing an illegal obstruction." Karen spun, eyes wide. But he's not part of the HOA. That's the whole problem." "Correct," the deputy said dryly. "He's not part of the HOA, which means your board has no jurisdiction here." She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in all the weeks of petty battles and power plays, Karen had nothing left to say. The deputy turned to Marcus. "If she tries to interfere, call us again. We'll escalate it appropriately." The demolition team resumed work. Bolts snapped. Concrete groaned. The fence toppled in 2 full sections, landing with a satisfying metallic crash. Karen stood frozen, watching everything she built come down in front of the hole. Neighborhood, her symbol of control, reduced to a pile of twisted wire and broken cement. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The facts spoke louder than her fury ever had. The fence was gone, flattened, hauled off piece by piece like it had never existed. The ground where it once stood was scraped clean. The line of demarcation now as open and undeniable as the blue sky above. But for Karen, the war wasn't over. Not yet. By Sunday morning, Marcus had already mowed the strip of grass where the fence had left ugly concrete scars. He was working quietly, earbuds in, when a sleek black SUV rolled up and stopped outside his driveway. 2 men in suits stepped out. One had a branded folder tucked under his arm. Marcus paused the mower, removed his earbuds, and watched them approach. Their movements were purposeful, rehearsed. He could smell the HOA board's fingerprints all over this. "Mr. Wells," the first man said, offering a tight, controlled smile. "I'm Aaron Bishop, legal counsel representing the Hill Community Association." Marcus gave a small nod. "Figured someone like you would show up eventually. We're here to notify you of a pending civil action regarding damage to HOA property and unauthorized destruction of a protected barrier." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Protected barrier? On my property?" The lawyer hesitated, clearly expecting more resistance. Karen appeared moments later, flanked by 2 board members and holding a yellow envelope. She didn't look smug anymore. She looked wired, frantic. Her hair wasn't done, her clipboard gone. This wasn't her show anymore. It was desperation, rebranded in legalese. "I told you this wasn't over," she said, stepping forward. "You made a big mistake yesterday." Marcus didn't even flinch. "Is that your lawyer? Or did you borrow him from someone else's lawsuit?" Aaron frowned. "We have sworn statements from multiple board members and residents who believe your actions violated neighborhood protections." Marcus opened his front gate and returned moments later with a folder thicker than theirs. "Here's what I have," he said calmly, handing it to the lawyer. "Stamped county records, city land maps, the HOA charter itself, which clearly lists my lot as excluded, and, just for fun, photos of the fence being installed without a permit, in the middle of the night, by an unlicensed contractor." The lawyer's smugness thinned. "Even so, the HOA has the right to enforce neighborhood standards. Not on land they don't own," Marcus shot back. "And I'm already in touch with my attorney, who's filing a counterclaim for trespassing, unlawful construction, and property damage. If you really want this to go to court, I'd love to bring Karen's emails and video footage into public record." Karen's face drained of color. "You recorded me," she hissed. "You recorded yourself," Marcus said. "With every note you left, every threat you made, every false violation form with your name on it. You documented your harassment better than I ever could." The lawyer's expression soured. I suggest, Marcus said slowly, his voice now commanding, you take this folder, go back to your office and read it, because the next time we talk, it'll be in front of a judge, and I promise he won't be impressed with Karen's fantasy HOA empire. There was silence, long, heavy silence. Then, without another word, the lawyer turned and walked back to the SUV. Karen followed, stiff and seething, her plans unraveling like thread in the wind, as the car drove off. A few neighbors, ones who'd stayed quiet before, gave Marcus a small wave from their porches, not in pity, in respect. He waved back, just once. Karen had brought a legal army to his door, but she hadn't counted on one thing. He was stronger than her fiction. He had the truth, and the next blow was coming from his side. The folder Marcus gave, the HOA lawyer never returned. 2 days passed. Then, for by the end of the week, Karen's flagrant patrols around the neighborhood had stopped altogether. Her sunglasses didn't appear at the usual times. The passive-aggressive notes disappeared from mailboxes. Her empire of clipped papers and whispered threats had gone dark. Marcus knew it wasn't over. People like Karen didn't vanish. They regrouped, recalculated, and came back louder. What he didn't expect, what almost made him laugh, was the certified letter that arrived Friday afternoon. A formal notice from the Hill Point Community Association. Karen had been suspended, indefinitely, apparently. Once the lawyer reviewed the files and saw the concrete evidence, the true property lines, the illegal construction, the recordings of Karen barking orders like a dictator, he realized they had no case. Worse, the HOA itself was exposed. Karen had overstepped her authority, acted without board approval in key moments, and dragged the entire neighborhood into potential litigation. The board, quietly and quickly, distanced itself. The suspension wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was the first crack in her armor. She was barred from issuing citations, attending meetings, or communicating on behalf of the HOA, and it only got better. 2 days later, Marcus was approached by someone he never expected, Linda Brooks, one of the longest-standing residents in the neighborhood and a former board member herself. She came to his porch with a stack of petitions. Some of us are starting to talk, she said, about change, real change. Karen's run this place like a fiefdom for years. You're not the first she's gone after, but you were the first to fight back. Marcus glanced at the papers, signatures, names, some he recognized, some he didn't. You want me to run for the board? He asked, surprised. Linda smiled. No, we want your help to dissolve it. His brow lifted. Turns out, when the HOA had been formed decades ago, it wasn't mandatory for homeowners outside of the original covenant to participate. Over time, through intimidation and confusion, most residents had been pressured into joining, not realizing they had legal grounds to opt out. Marcus's case had exposed that fact like a torch in the dark. Now, others were following suit. 3 neighbors had already filed their withdrawal. A 4th had contacted a lawyer. Momentum was building. You gave people a spine, Linda said. Karen's fence didn't just cross a line, it trampled over years of quiet resentment, and now everyone's looking at that rubble pile like it's the start of something. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply nodded and signed the petition at the top. Across the street, Karen's house remained shuttered. No morning patrol, no clipboard, just silence. But Marcus saw the shape of her silhouette once, hiding behind a curtain, peeking out like a ghost of her former reign. He raised his coffee mug in her direction, then turned back to his garden. Free. Not just of a fence, but of the illusion that she could ever cage him. And Karen hadn't lost a war, she'd triggered a revolution.